On Thursday the 21st of September, just 2 months ago, a 21-year-old mother named Deundrea Ford would be captured on surveillance cameras climbing into the back of a van, never to be seen again. At the time, she was just beginning to move on with her life after being the eyewitness to a murder investigation and had recently landed a job as a dancer for Divas Bar and Grill in Houston, Texas. But after speaking to a customer that night, for some reason, she decided to follow him out to his vehicle, proceeding to get inside. Since that day, she has not been seen or heard from, and her family have been pleading with the public for any help in locating the missing young woman. However, after 2 months of searching, the tragic story still doesn't seem to be drawing any useful headlines from the media, and her family believe that the police have been uncooperative in providing updates to the case. So, based on these rather controversial details, many are starting to wonder, what really happened to Deundrea Ford, and why is her case being handled so poorly? Deundrea LaKelsea Ford was born on the 24th of October in 2001, where she grew up with her close-knit family just outside the city of Houston in Texas. Little was known about her upbringing, but as she progressed through life, it was clear to everybody that Deundrea was an extremely loving and trusting individual, who always made sure to be there for her friends and family. And so, given her family-centric nature, it was no surprise when she eventually fell pregnant in 2017, and later gave birth to her son, who would quickly become her pride and joy. But due to her situation at the time, Deundrea felt it would be best to move in with her grandma, as she was a very young mother and understandably needed all the help she could get. So, Deundrea and her newborn baby soon moved into the house, which was located around 40 minutes outside of Houston, where she would spend the next 4 years providing for her family in any way she could. The young mother was able to hold down a few different jobs during this time. However, there was one particular occupation which would soon get her into a world of trouble, as in May of this year, Deundrea would find herself in the back of a car that was being driven by her manager, Otis Parker Jr., when gunfire would suddenly start raining down on the vehicle. Luckily, the young woman was able to survive the incident, which was later ruled as a robbery, but due to the fact she was in the car at the time, it meant she would be included in the case as a key witness, undoubtedly putting a target on her head. But with all suspects being captured shortly after the crime with conclusive evidence proving their involvement, it became a possibility that Deundrea wouldn't be forced to testify anymore, therefore relieving the concern for her safety. Well, following on from this senseless crime, the months continued to pass by, and it seemed Deundrea's life was beginning to get back on track, as she was able to find a new job working as a dancer for Divas Bar and Grill in Houston, where she quickly became a popular addition to the team. So much so that she was deemed by both her co-workers and patrons to the bar as an incredibly hard-working person with an infectious personality. But unfortunately, this attention that she was capable of drawing was not always a good thing, as during one of her shifts, she would trustingly follow a customer out to his van, never to be seen again. On Thursday the 21st of September, the 21-year-old exotic dancer was starting her evening shift at Divas Bar and Grill, where she had only been working for just over 2 weeks at the time. The shift started off as normal, with Deundrea performing her act for a relatively packed crowd of patrons, before eventually heading over to the bar to chat with the regular customers. By all available accounts, there was nothing particularly noteworthy about this night, and sooner or later her shift came to an end at approximately 1 AM, at which point she contacted an unnamed family friend to give her a ride home. However, it was well known that Deundrea always hated relying on her family for lifts to and from work, so if ever possible, she would sometimes try and find an alternative way home. So with this in mind, it was no surprise when she suddenly struck up a conversation with an unidentified man from the bar, alongside one of her colleagues, and they seemed to quickly hit it off, as after talking for an undisclosed amount of time, the pair eventually walked off together, exiting the bar. Deundrea then called the family friend who was supposed to be picking her up, and told them not to worry anymore, as she had found another way home. But anticipating the potential danger of her decision, the family friend told her to stay put and wait for the ride. Unfortunately, whether it was down to naivety or the fact Deundrea had other plans with this man besides getting a lift home, Either way, the young woman bravely decided to go with this stranger and climbed into the back of his van, insisting that her friend's help was not required. But little did she know at the time, this decision would later reveal itself to be a huge mistake, as after over 2 months of searching, the young mother has not been seen since. On Friday the 22nd of September, the family of Deundrea started to grow concerned, given that she had failed to return home to her grandmother's house as planned. After all, she had a 4-year-old son who was waiting for her back at home, and as she was a devoted mother who would always try and be there for her child, it was very strange that she didn't even update her grandmother that she would be coming home late. But given that Deundrea was still new to this job, her family tried to stay calm, assuming that she must have been working an extra shift or possibly found a way to earn some extra money. However, this relatively low level of worry soon developed into a deep fear, after 4 days would eventually go by, with Deundrea failing to get in touch with anybody in her family. So, with anxiety running high, a missing person report was finally filed. On Monday the 25th of September, the Houston Police Department would receive a call from the Ford family, explaining that their loved one had been missing now for 4 days and could potentially be in danger. Well, given the details surrounding her case, with Deundrea choosing to get a ride home with a possible stranger, the police quickly opened an investigation to see if they could locate the missing young woman, and it didn't take too long before they would get their first clue. After heading over to Diva's Bar and Grill and speaking to the staff, the police were able to confirm that Deundrea had in fact left the bar with an unidentified man. Surveillance camera footage was then provided, and according to reports, after climbing into the vehicle, the white GMC Savannah van then stayed still for around 1 hour with its headlights off, before eventually taking off into the night, with Deundrea still inside. The initial assumption of those who worked with the young woman was that she was simply looking for a free ride home, or an opportunity to make some extra money. So nobody was too worried at this time, which is why they allowed her to leave with this individual in the first place. But luckily, the staff were able to provide some useful details describing the man and his vehicle, as there was video footage of a New Jersey license plate attached to the van, which allowed the police to follow up on the case by searching for this particular vehicle. And then soon enough, the van was eventually located along with its owner. But what would happen next would truly shock the entire Ford family. On Wednesday the 1st of November, the Houston police were contacted by another police department from out of state, claiming to have found a van which matched the description of the vehicle Deundrea was seen getting into on the night of her disappearance. The detectives then travelled over to examine this van and speak to the owner, with the hopes that the missing young woman's whereabouts would soon be revealed. And then, after arriving on the scene, they were able to extract DNA evidence from the vehicle, as well as multiple cell phones which they intended on scanning for evidence. However, despite achieving what many assumed to be a huge break in the case, the police department were surprisingly met with a seemingly cooperative individual, who was then able to provide a story which satisfied the investigators, eventually leading to his release from custody. Moving on from that day, the police have still not yet revealed why they chose to release him, or if the potential suspect is still under investigation. So it is very possible there could be a lead related to this van. So much so in fact, that the Houston PD also asked Deundrea's family for a DNA sample to compare to the samples they got from the van, to see if this could prove she was in fact in that particular vehicle, or if they have the wrong man. But despite the efforts of everybody involved, this lead is still yet to provide any answers, with both Deundrea's family and detectives from multiple police departments failing to discover any further evidence to explain what really happened to the young mother. Now, unfortunately, this is all we know about the case for now. But one thing that is for certain is that the family will not stop fighting for their loved one, with her uncle in particular leading the charge to find justice for Deundrea. But with her disappearance taking place over 2 months ago now, it would appear that the likelihood of her safe return is growing weaker every day, meaning we need to step up our efforts if we ever hope to bring closure to Deundrea's family. So, with that, let's get into some of the potential theories. Now, just before I dive into the first theory, I wanted to quickly draw attention to a video made by the news broadcasting channel KPRC Houston, as they appear to have been one of the only media outlets that took the time to speak to Deundrea's family and actually listen to what they had to say. In this case, over the past 2 months there have been numerous videos produced by local news channels in Houston, Texas, that choose to sell this story as a likely kidnapping due to Deundrea's involvement in a murder trial 4 months prior to her disappearance. Now, although this detail is certainly a valid concern to be looked into, it would appear that the media chose to spin this story into an opportunity for ratings, rather than an attempt to help the family, heavily leaning on this angle as opposed to the wider reality of the missing person case. So based on this, we have to be extremely sensitive in assuming that there is any kind of link between the murder trial in May of this year and Deundrea's disappearance in September, as to continue picking at this particular thread appears to have done more bad than good, at least from her family's perspective. So with this in mind, why do her family believe that Deundrea's eyewitness involvement with the previous crime is so irrelevant to her missing person case? Well, for starters, the police had already managed to uncover all known suspects who were later charged for their crimes, so what would be the purpose of keeping Deundrea quiet? Also, with the media choosing to concentrate on the fact she was linked to a more nefarious lifestyle back in May, this may have led public opinion to dictate that Deundrea was somebody who got herself into this danger by her own poor decision making, as opposed to her being the victim of a potential kidnapper or worse. To add to this, I suppose you could also argue the young woman may have received more awareness if she was viewed as a more clean-cut individual, and therefore with the media choosing to cover her missing person case by connecting it to her sketchy past, the public may not have cared as much. I must admit, I see where her family are coming from, and I can understand their frustration, especially as they requested for the broadcasting networks to simply cover the missing person story, insisting that the murder trial was not connected. But most likely being more concerned with ratings, the news chose a more salacious angle to bring in more viewers to their platform, as opposed to simply raising the awareness that they were supposed to. However, saying this, could there have been a more innocent reason for their controversial decision? As a YouTube creator myself, I know firsthand that sometimes in order to raise awareness for a missing person who nobody is talking about, you have to present the story in a more compelling way, such as through the thumbnail or title. But even so, I believe it is still your duty to tell the story as accurately as possible, make sure to remain unbiased, and provide all the facts and theories to allow the public to draw their own conclusions. So perhaps the news broadcasters could have been more diligent by covering a range of theories as opposed to just focusing on the murder trial alone. However, could there potentially be another reason why the media chose to focus on this angle in particular? After all, her disappearance did only take place a few months after the suspects were first taken into custody. Well, one argument could be that the court proceedings were still yet to take place, so when Deundrea went missing, she was actually due to provide an eyewitness testimony that would likely heavily weigh into the judge's decision when it came to sentencing. Yes, the perpetrators were pretty much guaranteed to go to prison already, but an eyewitness testimony really can be the difference between 5 years and 50 years when it comes to a murder trial. So despite being captured and charged, the suspects still had a lot more to lose, giving them a huge motive to organise a possible kidnapping to keep Deundrea from testifying. Also, the Houston police were already able to track down the van that she was seen getting into and even spoke to the driver. So as almost 2 months has now gone by since this discovery, you'd think there would have been a charge by now if he was guilty. Therefore, if he is not guilty, perhaps there is another person involved, somebody who may be linked to the murder trial suspects. But either way, the most important point to mention here is that we have no proof of anything yet, and a big reason for that is the poor communication from the Houston Police Department to update the family and the media as to what they currently know. So, with that in mind, let's take a moment to look into some of the other potential theories. Now, if we remove the possibility of Deundrea's involvement in the murder trial being the reason for her disappearance, the only other real angle to look at, in my opinion, is the prospect of Deundrea being the victim of human trafficking. I suppose it's possible she was simply kidnapped by a random person with the sole intention of keeping her to themselves, but given that the police have already spoken to the owner of the van and released him from custody, I would assume that this is not the case. So, this only really leaves one other likely option, which would be that she was kidnapped and sold into an underground human trafficking ring. In fact, in Texas alone, it is estimated that there are currently over 300,000 victims, with approximately 80,000 being linked to trafficking in particular. So, given Deundrea's sketchy past and her new job as a dancer, I think it would be safe to say she would have certainly been a vulnerable target, to say the least. With this in mind, perhaps this person who picked her up from the bar was only a middleman who transported her to somebody else who is now keeping her captive. For this reason alone, I truly hope the police keep a close eye on the van's owner, as in my opinion, he is either the key witness or key suspect in finding out the truth. Additionally, an interesting point to mention that would remove the possibility of Deundrea's disappearance being linked to the murder trial is that the van was apparently sitting outside of the bar for over an hour. But the fact of the matter is, if you're actually planning on taking out a witness of a murder, you're likely going to do it as quickly and quietly as possible. You certainly don't sit in a van that can be identified and hang out for a while. However, saying this, you could also argue that to quickly speed off from the scene would have likely raised suspicion at the time. So maybe if the plan was to kidnap Deundrea, they purposely took their time in order to prevent a call to the police. After all, if this was in fact the premeditated plan, it certainly worked. But either way, we cannot confirm anything until the police give us more information. So hopefully the Houston PD will come out with an update to the case soon, allowing Deundrea's family to get the answers they so desperately need. Now, one final point that I would also like to quickly mention is that the handling of Deundrea Ford's case has been met with major criticism from not just her family, but also the public, as they feel that her story has not been given enough coverage, despite the extremely troubling details. It is heavily believed by most that if Deundrea was perhaps of a different race, then her story would have been met with a lot more media coverage and would likely have been taken more seriously by the police. Well, it is certainly something to think about, but outside of race, you could also argue that due to Deundrea's slightly nefarious background, this too may have been a heavy influence in determining how much coverage her story received, compared to other victims like Gabby Petito, who likely didn't have the same sketchy past and therefore received a much more thorough investigation. But either way, all of these victims are people at the end of the day, so it shouldn't matter what their background is or what they look like. The only notable concern should be that a human being has disappeared and there is a grieving family desperate for answers. So personally, I think every case should be treated equally by both the media and the investigating police department. My only hope is that going forward, more can be done to protect these individuals, as if things don't change, criminals are going to continue their illegal practices, knowing there is a good chance they will get away with it. But just before I end the video, I wanted to finish on a more positive note, as despite the rather bleak situation Deundrea may have found herself in, it is still very much possible that she may one day return home safe. A key example of this would be the recent discovery of Shamari Brantley, who was another missing young black woman that was last seen getting into a van in New York. But after months of searching by her family, she was finally found alive and well, and was able to reunite with them once again. So from this particular example, it is certainly possible that Deundrea's case may also have a happy ending. We just need to keep searching and raising awareness, so hopefully she will be recognised one day by a member of the public and returned home to her son, where she belongs. Anyway, with that, I think I'll leave this video here. But if you have any potential theories of your own that you'd like to discuss, please leave your ideas in the comments below and I will do my best to get back to you. But until then, thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any case updates. Also, if you found this video interesting, make sure to check out the playlist on screen now, where I've covered a range of similar cases including Shamari Brantley, as well as a number of other cases that are unfortunately still ongoing.